So welcome along to the first little video about our content. In this series of videos, what we're going to do is cover the basic ideas behind ethics, okay? What we're going to study, why we study it, some basic terminology so that we can use that as a platform to then move forward with some more detailed exploration of these topics. What we're going to cover in this particular lecture are some foundational definitions and concepts about what ethics is, particularly in relation to business. We're also going to have a look at the relationship between ethics and other standards and make sure that we can differentiate an ethical problem from a problem that might be due to breaching another standard like etiquette or the law. The third thing we're going to do is have a look at this idea of ethical relativism. So is there a single standard of ethics, or does ethics vary in different contexts? And we're going to look at some of the problems that it raises if we accept ethical relativism. Finally, of course, we need to look at ethics in organisations. So we're going to look at how the organisational context can affect ethical decision making. So our first task is to try and identify what ethics is, and by the very nature of that question, what ethics is not. The two core ideas behind ethics lie in answering two related but different questions, right? One question is, how do I live a good life? What is a good life? What is it to be a good person? And that means that we need to assess, how do I make the kind of right sorts of decisions? So we get different approaches to ethics to address these two particular concepts. Both of them, though, are trying to identify what's right or wrong, what makes a person good or bad. When we investigate these issues, which can also be called moral philosophy, we end up having to deal with three related sorts of questions, right? We have these meta-ethical questions. They're questions about the nature of ethics, right? So in my last slide, in the first slide, what we were talking about was this idea of, is ethics relative? Like, that's a meta-ethical question. That's about the nature of ethics itself. The second types of questions that we can deal with are descriptive questions, right? And as that implies, this is about describing what's occurring. Okay, so it's actually kind of studying what people do, what people or if we're in business, organizations do. Okay, so it's describing. We mainly concentrate on normative questions. Anytime you see the word normative in your studies, it's really kind of giving you a hint that what it's dealing with is giving you advice, giving you guidance, or it's about what happens in practice or the real world. Okay. So we're going to deal mainly with normative ethical questions in the course. And here you can see a little more detail about those three core areas of ethics study. We have questions that are meta-ethical. Are there moral facts? Is ethics relative? We have descriptive questions. What's actually occurring? So what factors encourage unethical behaviour? Which companies are more likely to have a code of ethics or have an ethics breach? As I said before, we're going to concentrate on normative questions, right? What should people do? Okay, what should people do? And they're the kinds of frameworks that we're going to deal with. Of course, we're studying business ethics, so we're particularly interested in these kinds of ethical questions as they occur in a business setting. And as I've said, we're concentrating on those normative questions as they relate to business. What should businesses do or not do? Of course, to do that, we will have to touch on a few meta-ethical and descriptive questions. One final terminology issue is that we're going to use the ideas of ethics and morality interchangeably. Look, they're both examining this idea of right and wrong, good and bad. So when someone says, is it moral, we're also going to interpret that as meaning, is it ethical? Because we're studying business, one of the things that we need to understand is that decision making and people's actions occurs in a nested nature, particularly in business, right, from this business perspective. So what we have are individuals making decisions or taking actions. Within an organisation, generally, And that organisation operates within a system. So how might that work? Well, let's look at the systemic context, the highest level. So, for instance, if you're a listed company, so you're listed on the securities exchange, the stock exchange, but it's really the securities exchange is its technical term. Okay, so if you're listed, that's the kind of system that you're in, and you have all these laws that apply to you and tell you what you must and must not do. You have all these market forces. That's going to affect the organisational decision making. So we might be in an organisation that's listed. So we might be listed on the ASX, and we might be within the company. I'm just going to pick a company at random, BHP Limited. Okay, so BHP has drivers that come from the social system. But at the end of the day, really individuals make decisions. Individuals within organisations make these ethical decisions. So we have a worker in BHP needs to make a decision. They are obviously going to be affected by what BHP's particular policy and drivers and the forces at work within that organisation are. In summary, ethical decision making within organisations requires us to look at how individuals make decisions. So we particularly look at that in weeks 2 or 3. This week, we're going to have a very brief introduction to how the forces within a business, okay, so within a business at that second level, can affect individual decision making. And we're also going to have a look at economic systems in week 4, a look at justice. So we try to cover off on these 3 levels that are involved in understanding ethics in organisations. And so I think you just need to have any inkling about what's going on in the press, look at the Royal Commission into Banking, for instance, as a very recent example, to understand that ethics is important in a business setting. And hopefully out of this course, we'll get an idea, a foundational idea about how we might think through ethical issues.